Lawrence, there are some interesting developments happening in Canada regarding the basic services obligations. Can you give us an update on what's happening?
Sure, Paul. Recently, the Canadian regulator, known as the CRTC, has been reviewing the definition of the basic services obligation. The obligation for the past 10 years has been imposed on companies to provide a minimum of telephone and dial-up services to rural and regional Canada. The decision now is whether to include broadband in the basic services obligation, which would be a significant revision. There's obviously been a lot of discussion and consultation, and on the one side there are companies like Bell who say that actually the obligation should be removed entirely because they argue that there is now competition provided by the cable cos, by other ISPs. They're penetrating with VoIP and there's no obligation on them, so why should the incumbents still labour under this obligation? It's a meritorious argument. On the other side, some of the regional telcos are arguing that broadband should certainly be part of this obligation, and in fact it should be subsidised under the current subsidy framework, whereby the large telcos actually assist the small telcos with some of this funding. MTS, the Manitoba provider, for instance, has estimated that to provide broadband to rural Canada would cost about $7 billion, and that this should be assisted by the broader telecoms community. So it's everyone's sort of waiting to see how the CRTC will decide the issue. It's, in my opinion, likely to actually include broadband, and then the next question will be, well, what type of broadband will satisfy the obligation? And this leads us to another decision that the CRTC has recently deliberated on. And it relates in respect of the Bell's commitments to provide, to use some of the escrow funds that have been utilised since 2002. There's approximately $700 million in escrow funds following a freeze in prices in 2002. And the companies have to use half of these funds to provide some services to rural and regional Australia. Bell argued that it should be allowed to provide these services in the form of wireless broadband. Some of the other companies argued, no, that's not satisfactory, they're not fast enough speeds, that it should be fibre. Earlier in the year, the CRTC said that Bell can't provide wireless broadband, it doesn't meet the minimum standards. But last month, the CRTC, backed up by the Supreme Court, actually reversed this decision and made a call that actually wireless technology, and in this case it's HSPA+, provides adequate broadband services. So it's interesting to see in Canada, you know, they are trying to redress Canada's lackluster broadband situation. Historically, in 2001, Canada was second in broadband penetration in the OECD. It's fallen now to, out of the top 10, it's now 11th place. So the CRTC, in a way, is driving some of the broadband developments, which is an interesting contrast on the eve of the Australian decision to launch the NBN, that on the one hand in Canada it's being driven by the regulator, on the other hand in Australia it's been backed by intensive government planning.
Thank you very much, Lawrence.
You're welcome.